Hello and welcome to the Grumpy Sound Guy Show. I am your host, Mr. J.R. Everhart. I am the Grumpy Sound Guy, at least online I am. I'm really a nice guy. Just come out and hang out with me, man. You know, let's eat some wings together and talk about Star Wars. I got the Mandalorian shirt on today. Looking forward to some new stuff that's coming this year in the Star Wars universe. I am a total nerd, for all that kind of stuff. But I digress. Today's topic we're going to talk about, it's Fan Appreciation Week here in the Grumpy Sound Guy world, so I am fielding your questions over on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and even in the shorts here on YouTube. Fielding your questions, answering your questions. I had someone ask me to talk about analog mixers versus digital mixers, and just my feel about the differences in mix approach and all that kind of stuff. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And if you're into that and you're a sound geek or a musician who is looking for more information about digital mixing versus analog mixing, today is going to be your day. You do not want to miss a second of today's show. Hey guys, if I can have literally 60 seconds of your time here just to ask you to please subscribe to the channel. It costs absolutely nothing to subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you can help us give you more of this content on the free side of the channel. Also, if you're really digging what we're doing here and you're digging the Grumpy Sound Guy content, please consider joining the membership side of the YouTube channel. It costs about $5 a month, so about the price of a Starbucks cup of coffee or whatever. You can become an inner circle supporter of the Grumpy Sound Guy and the content that I'm putting up. We'll get all kinds of really cool one-on-one live chat stuff in there, group chat stuff, all that sort of thing. Plus you'll get content that is posted there that will never become public, so make sure you get over there and check that out. And thank you for supporting everything that I'm doing here with the Grumpy Sound Guy. And we're back. So analog versus digital. Let me see now. So the biggest benefit that I will say right out of the gate of digital over analog is being able to save your mix. That by far in and of itself has been a godsend. I mean an absolute godsend. First of all, I can have a 90% there start scene. So when I go to mix a new band, I call up that start scene. I go down to an open slot in my mixer and copy that start scene into an open slot with that band's name on it. And I will save that mix after sound check, after the first set, and at the end of the night. Next time I go to mix that band, I recall that scene, and boom, we're 99% there at that stage of the game. We're really just correcting for the difference in acoustic environments and the room and all that kind of jazz. But having that start scene, all my drum compression is in the ballpark, EQing is in the ballpark, my channel layout, all my routing, everything is where I want it to be, boom, just like that. And man, there is huge amounts of value in that. That is probably one of my favorite things. And guys, who work with me, especially new bands, they're amazed at how quick our sound check goes. And it's like, I don't really need to do a big long crazy sound check, because like in analog days where we were starting from nothing every single time we went out to the club, I mean, some of your stuff may stay the same, if you can keep people's fingers out of it, but you knew that you were going to pretty much be starting from zero every time you went out, every time you got into a new room with a new band or a new venue. It just was what it was, man. You know what I'm saying? So, having that ability to just come back and recall stuff is my favorite thing about digital. My least favorite thing about digital is the fact that you have every buzzer and whistle available on my boy Ryder's right here next to me. There, go on in there, buddy. Come on, go on in. I don't like the fact that you have every buzzer and whistle available on every channel, because most guys get themselves in trouble that way. You know, like I only use gates on drums. I don't use gates on anything else, you know. And I go in to do a lot of fix the mix kind of gigs where I'm being called in to kind of straighten out somebody else's mess. And it amazes me how I find gates on acoustic guitars and find gates on, I found a gate one time on a click channel. What were you thinking, dude? Gate and compression on the click channel. You know, I mean, did you need to compress your click a little bit or something? Or was there some noise in your click line that you were trying to raise the noise floor around? I don't know. I turned both of them off, and I had no noise or anything in the click channel. You know, I don't know what people were thinking, or they're just kind of looking at the wrong channel when they're doing stuff. That's the other thing that's tricky about digital, especially if you have a desk in front of you and you're not just on an iPad. You got to hit that select button on the channel that you want to manipulate before you go to the dynamic section. And if you don't get into a habit of that, you think that you're working on the kick channel and you're really working on the guitar channel, and we both know that's going to be disastrous. You know, so there's some things about digital that you just absolutely positively have got to get your head wrapped around. Less is more. You know, less is more. You ask yourself, what would you run if you were running an analog system and you had a bunch of outboard gear? What would you run on drums? What would you run on, you know, vocals? You know, that kind of thing. So that's where I see a lot of guys getting in trouble. The thing I miss most about analog is being able to get a nice, warm, fat mix just by plugging everything in. You know, that was the beautiful thing about analog. It made a lot of mediocre sound guys look really good, because you didn't have to be a rocket scientist sound guy to get a good mix. You just didn't, man. You know, if you had a decent, you know, especially if you were lucky enough to have like really British made or quality made, you know, consoles, man, you just kind of plug everything in and rough the EQ in, and it sounds big and fat. You know, in the world of digital, you have to recreate that, especially with these middle market consoles, because you are absolutely not going to get any warmth or anything out of the preamps in these middle market consoles. Now, if you're working on a Heritage D, or you're working on, you know, an Avid Venue or something like that, they're using analog, you know, preamps and converting them to digital. So the mix sounds like an analog console, you know. To where in the world of the middle market stuff, where you're using, you know, the Soundcraft UI or SI, any of the Behringer stuff, the XR stuff, X32, Midas X32, you know, the Mackie DL stuff. I really think the Mackie DL preamps are really, really hot and harsh. That's why I'm not a huge fan of Mackie. They're built like tanks, they'll last forever. I mean, if you want to buy a mixer that'll last, you know, there you go, you know. But, you know, what else is there? Yamaha, all the TF stuff. All these mixers pretty much, you know, for the most part sound the same. You know, I don't see a drastic difference from one mixer to another. You know, it's really just kind of like, what workflow are you most comfortable with? And kind of go with that. I know guys that absolutely love the Mackie workflow or the QSC Touch Mix workflow. I don't care for either one of those. I mean, I can go mix on them. You know, I have mixed on them in the past. I do a lot of walk-in stuff where I'm in that environment, mix-wise. I don't really struggle with it, but it's not a workflow that I feel is efficient and really gives me all the tools that I want to do what I do, you know? A lot of times I dumb down what I do because the mixer just can't do what I want it to do. But that's entirely up to, you know, the Indian, not the arrow. You know what I'm saying? So, you know, being able to recall mixes is huge. You know, having to recreate that analog warmth and feel is really an EQing and compression thing. The better mixer you have, the better the EQ is going to be, and the better the compression is going to be. You know, I like the Soundcraft stuff because it's under the Harman umbrella. Harman is the mother company that does like JBL, DBX, all the stuff that we've grown to love, Lexicon, all that sort of stuff. So when you have like a UI 24 or something, you have all that technology built into that. And that's kind of cool, because in analog days, those were the exact units I was using for outboard stuff in front of house. I also like the Midas stuff, the M32 stuff. You guys that follow me know that I'm an M32 junkie. So I think this stuff just works. They have Clark Techniques. Music Tribe is a mother company there. They own Clark Techniques, and they own, a bunch of Stutter. They own a bunch of stuff that is quality. Most of their companies were studio companies at one time, to where the Harman companies were really more, live audio companies. I'm usually happy on either one of those. I don't mind the workflow. I like the workflow on the M32 better than the Soundcraft workflow. The UI workflow really jacks people up, because it's just a completely different way to get to like input gain and stuff like that. There's no virtual knob for input gain. It's a fader and a different fader layer, and you're browsing on their their UI browser, in that you're not downloading an app, you're actually connecting to the browser, and that's how you're controlling the mixer. That kind of screws people up sometimes if they're not used to that kind of workflow. All my IT and cybersecurity guys that play in bands, they all totally get that. They don't struggle with any of that kind of stuff. It's really the old school analog guy who was afraid of digital and thought it was a fad. Now he realizes that it's not a fad, and if I'm going to continue to do this, I've got to move into the digital world that struggles with this stuff, because they have no IT background. I had a guy last year that worked for me for a short period of time who completely bellyached and complained all the time, like, dude, you got to be as much of an IT guy nowadays as you are a sound engineer. And I'm like, it's just kind of, the way the world works. It's... It is what it is, it's just a progression of technology. You're either going to get on the bus and go down the road with it, or you're going to get off the bus and get out of the business altogether, and the more time you're away from it, the harder it is to get back into it, because the technology is changing so rapidly now that it's really tough to keep up. Now look, I know in that list of mixers I didn't talk about the Wing or any of the Allen and Heath stuff, but you can wrangle that stuff into there just as well. I just didn't remember to add those mixers, because those guys, man, dude, let me tell you something. Some of these cats that are Wing owners and that are into the new SQ line of Allen and Heath, it's like a cult or something, man. They will come and crucify me quicker than anything. I'll guarantee you that someone will comment in this video about how you can't compare the SQ and the Wing with the rest of those mixers that I mentioned, because they're radically different and they're so much better. And, the SQ's 96K and all that kind of stuff. And I'll respond to that this way. You bring your Wing or your SQ to a gig, and I'll bring my M32, and then let's go around and ask people in the audience if they can hear a difference, because they won't, okay? No one cares, dude. It's about workflow and what little buzzers and whistles you want, or what, gear arrogance, level of gear arrogance you want to, carry about yourself. I don't care. You can believe that the Wing is the greatest thing since sliced bread, or the SQ rack, the new SQ rack is the greatest thing. And maybe it is. Maybe I just don't realize it. I don't know. But I know in my world, my clients are crazy happy with the stuff that I use, and no one's complaining. People rave about my mix all the time. If you don't believe me, follow me on Facebook and follow the CLP Audio and Staging page on Facebook. Read the reviews, and, the proof's in the pudding, dude. That's all M32 stuff. It's the Indian, not the Arrow. Analog guys really get that, because, in the days of analog, you had to really, have a good ear, because you couldn't see the mix. Nowadays, every console or iPad app or whatever has a real-time analyzer, an RTA, where you can see the mix. You can mix with your eyes. Many times that's a problem, because people aren't mixing with their ears, they're mixing with their eyes. In the days of analog, we didn't have that. If we were lucky, we have a console that have a little LED meter on each channel, so we could see the signal on each channel. Your compressor would be showing you how many dB you're compressing and that sort of thing. That was it, dude. You had to actually use your ears, dude, you know, and if you didn't have an ear that was dialed in for frequency or have an ear that, for levels, that sort of stuff, an ear for effects, being able to hear those things. I had someone ask me in the comment section this week when I put up the first short about this being Fan Appreciation Week, asked me to talk about compression. Well, man, that's not an easy subject to talk about in a 90-second reel. You know what I'm saying? That's a whole nother long format video that I need to do to kind of discuss that. But learning to use compression right is as much about developing a feel for compression in your system by being able to hear it and feel how it affects your mix as it is by just barking raw numbers at you. Analog guys get that because that's kind of how we honed our hearing, and our mixing skills before digital. To where now in the digital world, you got a compressor on everything. On every out, you have compression. And man, I see a ton of guys that over compress their mix and, just ruin their mix by, and the other thing is what I call negative EQing, which is, they'll do an EQ change on the channel, and then in the vocal group, like let's say the vocal channels, then in the vocal group, they'll bring that EQ back because they're not paying attention to how they're manipulating signal flow. And then on the house EQ, take it out again, or they're taking out too much of one thing all the way across the signal flow, and it just robs the mix of any kind of fidelity or any kind of real warmth, you know what I'm saying, and depth, and let the mix have life. Your mix should have life. That's something analog guys understand, because analog, as a rule, just gave you tons of body and life to the mix. To where in digital world, excuse me, in digital world, you got to create all that. Digital consoles is just a mirror of what you give it. If you don't know how to manipulate the signal to make things where you want them to be, and you have to have a system that can reproduce that, that's the other side of the conversation. It's not all in the mixer. You got to have front of house boxes that can go down to, 40, 38, hertz, that sort of thing, to get that solid 50 hertz kick drum. You got to have, top boxes that can reproduce the mid and high in an efficient manner, power behind it in an efficient manner, processing behind it in an efficient manner. The mixer's only half the conversation. Everyone thinks that all their problems are in the mixer. Many times when I walk in to do these, fix the mix gigs, then I find that the problems are on the other side of the system. So I typically go through the whole entire thing to make sure that we're cooking with peanut oil. You know what I'm saying? So that's really the biggest differences that I see in different approaches that I see from analog to digital. It's not often, honestly, I get asked this a lot, but not a whole lot, because most of the guys that I'm bumping into nowadays did not come from digital. They're young guys, let's face it, X32 has been around now, 15 years or something or whatever? When did it come out? Like 2013, 14, something like that? So maybe we're pushing 20 years or whatever. So you got a lot of cats, at least I find, a lot of young cats, they have no clue about analog. They don't realize that your digital mixer is configured in a way to mimic what analog mixers look like. They don't understand what the numbers mean because they never had to sort those numbers out in the analog world like us analog guys had to do. And then when we came over to digital, it made sense to us because that was the mindset of the manufacturer, was to make moving from analog to digital as seamless as they could. Soundcraft's done a really good job with that with their SI line. The SI feels as close to an analog console as what you can get. It's very user-friendly that way. The iPad app really opens that console up to more modern mixing styles. But for a guy that's never been on digital, I always recommend the SI line of Soundcraft mixers, or it's something like that. Nowadays, we're kind of far enough down the digital road to where most cats are comfortable with diving into the X32 or M32 world, or any of the other, the Yamaha TF, any of the other stuff that's out there. Mackie stuff, I see a lot of Mackie stuff in the middle market because it's cheap. You know, it's less expensive than some of the other stuff. Mackie, it just blows my mind sometimes. What I complain about with the wing and the SQ rack, Mackie got right. Go figure. You know, give us 32 by 16 on the front of a mixer and a network port that we can plug a router into, and we're good to go, Jack. Good to go. We just want some really good, you know, a decent sounding preamps, and we need EQs, compressors, and gates that actually work as they're supposed to work. So yeah, I mean, there you have it. You know, that's kind of been the big difference between analog and digital, and how our worlds have collided now. And you know, I think every digital engineer that came from analog laments the ease of getting that really cool, fat analog sound, and now is striving to take their middle market digital console and make it sound as much like analog as they can possibly, you know, milk out of those units. So yeah, man, I mean, that's kind of where we are with all this, you know, and everybody has come to the table, you know, trying to get your money as the consumer, and trying to make gear that appeals to your needs and that sort of thing. So, you know, I think we're going to see some really, really cool stuff in the coming years. You know, I think there's some really, you know, manufacturers understand the demand of the middle market. They know that that's where all the money's at. You know, there's more of us buying gear than there is pro touring guys. Pro touring guys are buying another level of gear to begin with. They may have some of this middle market stuff in their inventory to cover local stuff that they do, but at the end of the day, these manufacturers know that we all want that analog warmth and depth again back in our mix, you know. So I think it's going to gradually get better over the coming years. I think we're just at, I mean, honestly, even 15, 20 years into this digital thing, I still think we're at the infant stages of the development of this stuff. You know, it's every year when something else comes out, it gets just a little bit better. You know, every year it's progressing. Every new format that is released takes us to the next level. And a lot of it's trial and error, you know, from the manufacturing standpoint. You know, a lot of it is, hey, let's try to throw everything in the kitchen sink in this unit and throw it out into the consumer market and see what sinks and what swims. You know, so I mean, I think that really does genuinely have a big part of it. You know, what people buy dictates the technology. I mean, obviously, you could have the greatest, you know, middle market digital mixer on earth, but if it's not something people want to buy, the manufacturers are not going to waste their time to develop more like that, or, you know, that sort of thing. And I mean, I think that's why we see some of these guys kind of dragging their feet, you know, on the middle market scene, because it's just not selling great. You know, everybody seems to be massively into the X and M32 stuff, the wings, the SQ, Allen and Heath stuff, and in our middle market of the Mid-Atlantic, I don't see near as much, you know, like Yamaha, PreSonus, Mackie, you know, stuff like that. There's a lot of bottom feeder guys that are using the Mackie stuff because it's really durable, especially with ears, in-ear monitor systems. You know, they're great mixers for that. The Soundcraft UI, I see a lot of those for in-ear mixers because they're really good mixers geared toward that sort of thing. But as far as having a front of house console that you really enjoy mixing on, the workflow is compatible with how you want to work, and you're getting the final product out of front of house that you want to get out of front of house. You know, there's only a handful of guys that are taking up that, you know, and you can pretty much go anywhere in any major market and still find, you know, X and M32 to some degree, you know, present. And I think those are still very relevant consoles, even though they're starting to get some age on them, even though, you know, we could grow from that. You know, I'd like to see some more developments, you know, on those fronts. But like I said, This is an exciting time, man. It really is. It's an exciting time to be a sound engineer, to watch these things develop and to watch these things come out year after year after year. And having been an old analog, dog in my life, I am now looking back over my career, and I have been in this. I have been mixing and doing pro audio for 37 years. This will be 38 years in 2025. I have spent the last 12, 15 years on digital. So do the math. I still have more time on analog gear than I do on digital gear just because of the way it's developed. But I don't see me going back to anything analog anytime soon, outside of maybe just some little talking head stick rigs that I send out to do corporate stuff and weddings and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I hope that helped you guys. I hope that kind of put some things in perspective. There's a lot to talk about in this conversation between analog and digital. Some of it is super cool stuff. A lot of it is stuff you've heard me say before in the past. But I'm much happier in the world of digital than when I was in analog. My back thanks me. I mix, 98% of my shows on a M32C DL32 setup, so it's in a rolling rack, and it makes life way easier. I love sitting out front with an iPad instead of a 5-foot long, analog console, that weighs 120 pounds or something like that or whatever. I love the ability to be able to go and, be able to go and recall mixes and all the things that we've been talking about in this video. Hey, look, man, I love you guys. I appreciate you guys. I hope you guys come back next week. I am your Grumpy Sound Guy. I'll see you later.